In this section of the OpenShift 201 lab, we're going to look at how we can manage resources by limiting the resource usage for each of our applications. As a reminder, please make sure to follow along with the written instructions to get the latest version and to see any changes that might have been made since this video was recorded. And also a reminder that I'll just be demonstrating the steps that you actually need to execute rather than running through all of the material in the lab instructions. So please be sure to do that yourself as you're working through. So the first thing that we're going to do is to create an Nginx deployment, and we're going to make sure that we switch to our dev namespace before we do that. So I'm going to demonstrate that in the web console. I'm going to copy this YAML, and here I am in my tools namespace. So I'm going to make sure first to switch to the dev namespace. Then I'm going to click add and import YAML, and then paste in the YAML for that deployment and click create. Next, we're going to run a command in order to set some new resource request and limit levels for that deployment. So I've opened my terminal, and first I'm going to make sure that I am also in the correct dev namespace that I want to be working in. So if you need to switch, you can use the OC project and type in the namespace that you want to switch to. Then I'm going to run the command here in order to set these new request and limit levels for our CPU and memory. And we can see that those have been applied. Next, we're going to expose the deployment with a service. So I'm going to use this command and run that in my terminal. And then I'm going to create a secure route with Edge TLS termination from this service. So I'm going to grab this command and run that in the terminal as well. Then I'm going to create a network policy that will allow traffic to come into our pod. So I'm going to copy this command, and again, using the add button this time, I'm going to paste this YAML in, click create, and that will create this allow from OpenShift ingress network policy. Our next step will be to create a new deployment that will be used for load testing. But first, I'm going to copy this command and paste it into a text editor, because we will need to update the value for our service host in order to match the host that we have generated. So I'm going to go back into the OpenShift web console this time and click on the open URL button. And this will give me the path that I need. So I'm going to grab that. Then I'm going to replace the value for service host here, and making sure to take out my HTTPS, because that is already going to be a part of this argument down here. Now I can copy this YAML, and again, clicking the plus icon, pasting that YAML into OpenShift web console, clicking create. I've now created a new deployment that will do the load testing for us. Because we didn't set limit and request values for our newest deployment, it will use the default values in OpenShift. To find what these defaults are on our cluster, you can run ocdescribe, and by pasting that into my terminal and running it, that will show what these default request and limit values are set to in our namespace. Next, I'm going to switch to the OpenShift web console and make sure that I'm in the developer view. Then I'm going to click on the Observe tab. And we can see now the result of our load test running is that our CPU usage is increasing. Next, I'm going to switch to the OpenShift web console and navigate to the developer view and making sure that we're looking at the Observe tab. So I'm going to change to the developer view, click on the Observe tab. And then in the dashboard dropdown, I'm going to switch over to Kubernetes compute resources / workload. Now I can choose which of my workloads I'd like to look at. So in this case, we can see the increased load on our Nginx deployment. That's a result of the load test that has been running. Here we can see that the CPU usage has exceeded the request value and has actually reached right up to the limit value and slightly exceeding the limit value that we've set here. So this pod is going to be experiencing throttling as time goes on. Next, I'm going to create a custom PromQL query to view the CPU throttling. So first, I'm going to copy this command as it is, but then I'm going to paste it into my text editor and make some changes. So we need to make sure that we enter the correct namespace. So I'm going to grab that. And then we need to make sure that we've got the correct pod name as well. So I'm going to grab that from here. Again, making sure that we update the pod name and the namespace. Now I can copy this command. Now that I've copied my command, I'm going to click on the Observe tab again, and then Metrics, and then paste my new custom query into the custom query section, and press Enter. Next, if I navigate back to the pod in my Nginx deployment, and view the metrics, we can see that even without load test running, the memory usage hasn't greatly increased, and that we are operating at a reasonable level. So we've probably set our memory requests and limits to a good level based on that logging. Next, we're going to use this ocdescribe pod command in combination with the name of our pod in order to see what the quality of service class is for that pod. So I'm going to take this command and paste it into my text editor. Then I'm going to grab that pod name and place it into my command. Now I'll copy this command and run it in my terminal. Now that we've run this command and got the results, we can see that the quality of service class for this pod is burstable because we have our request value lower than our limit value. The next command that I'm going to run in this lab exercise is OC_get_resource_quota. This will list the available quotas. The next command that I'm going to run is OC_get_resource_quota. This command will list the available quotas. Next, I'm going to run OC_describe_resource_quota to view usage statistics related to any hard limits defined in the quota. When used without arguments, the OC_describe_quota command will display the cumulative limits set for all resource quota resources on the project. Make sure when you complete this section of the lab that you turn off the load testing deployment. You can do this using the OC scale deployment command.